I need to be looking at your face more often, Bubba.
Hi, Catherine.
Good, we got it. All right, call to order the City of Norman City Council study session. I'll learn to get that right. Tuesday, September 20th, 2022. One agenda item, discussion regarding the creation of a council handbook, including but not limited to meeting processes and policies.
Thank you.
And Catherine, you've got the floor.
Thank you.
Thank you. So Brenda's passing around
Thank you.
just a brief handout. We talked about this at retreat. It's something that I think David Weatherford recommended, and he actually gave me a copy of one of their manuals for a city he represents. And so we talked about meeting maybe quarterly over the next year to put together this handbook. Seemed like the easiest place to start was a table of contents to figure out what we want in here, what needs to be added to this list, what do you think you don't need. And so what I've got in here is based loosely off the Sand Springs manual that was shared with us, but I added some things and I asked the management team what they thought was missing. And so some of the things you'll see in here are things that you get at orientation that might be useful to have all in one document, all in one book. So just real briefly, what is proposed here is sort of the history of Norman, our form of government, what that means, the charter. We would include the charter itself in the book, so you'd have that for your easy reference. The organizational chart of the city, all of the boards and committees that we have and what their role is, including standing committees and ad hoc committees. The ethics policy they follow. All of our public trusts, we have a number of those, and summary of city departments, what each department does, how many staff they have, that kind of thing. And then moving into council duties, including your statutory training requirements, charter provisions and code provisions that apply specifically to you all. And then resolutions that have been adopted over the years, and that's what I've handed out to you as I started gathering that. And it occurred to me, some of you probably had not seen some of these because they're older or they don't necessarily get discussed over and over. But these are just a sample of some of them. We'll keep looking through, but to see what else we have.
Thank you.
For policies. And then our trust, I said I'd give you a summary, but we'd also provide each indenture that governs each trust, so you'd have that information, financing and budgeting process. And then I kind of just started adding things as I thought of them or as they were suggested to me that come up a lot. So Open Meeting Act, Open Record Act issues, development process, social media, best practices for media inquiries, board meetings, employees as citizens, council role in union negotiations, municipal campaigns and contributions. And that might be where you all see some holes that we need to put more information in that section. If you think there's something missing, I'm also happy to pass around this book so you can kind of get an idea of what they've provided. So that's all I had to present. I just wanted to get feedback to kind of get us started on this process.
Go ahead. As a start, we found out that Edmond also has one that may be electronic, a little easier to.
Yeah, and I think there are a number of cities who've done the OMAG training that have also adopted this model. I do have one copy that is electronic that was provided to me. I think it's also Sand Springs, but David gave me the manual on a disc, so that helps. But we have a lot of this information already that council's adopted. We just need to put it all in one place.
I would like it bound with mahogany leather.
No problem. The budget's
With my
limitless, I'm
name
sure.
on it.
But it's something that can be adopted every year, and each new council member would get one, and maybe be a good reference point.
Well, we can save trees and just put it on the iPad, right?
So I know we started this process when Mayor Clark was still here, and we were primarily concerned with some things that were going on. And I know that something that we had talked about briefly, but was just kind of touched on in retreat, was consequences for actions or code of ethics being broken. So I know the guy that was brought out from, was it from Sand Springs or whatever? He said that he doesn't recommend any consequence. So what are we doing? Because if there's no consequence, then why are we here?
Well, that's up to you all. You've adopted, several years ago, we adopted an ethics ordinance. It has started as a policy and then came on, I believe, via the rule of 3 to be adopted by council. And so that is in the code book. It does not have consequences. So if that's something that you all would like to implement, we need to talk about what that looks like. I think the hard part personally from our office is we're the ones that advise on that. And if we're representing the body and it's an ethics issue or a conflict with another council member and there's teeth to it, that gets challenging for us in representation, but we can certainly address that, I think, in the ordinance.
And then the other piece of that, I think you mentioned this, and I just want to make sure, were you talking about in this that we could possibly set some rules as far as like for committee and how that goes moving forward, how committees are selected, how chairs are selected?
Yeah.
Is that
sure.
part of what we can add in this handbook?
We can do it in the handbook, we can do it in an ordinance. Yeah,
Okay.
definitely.
Because I'd definitely like to see that in here. I'd like to know that there's some rhyme and reason and purpose behind things.
Seniority.
It's been based off of seniority and experience previously, so I think that that's something that we should definitely take into consideration.
Councilmember Schuler.
So my question was kind of along the lines of if we choose to update, look at some of these resolutions specifically around the code of ethics or the way, kind of as Councilmember Sully was talking about with kind of codifying some of the procedural things, like what would the process for that look like? Does it happen, do we look at all of those individually before we adopt the handbook as a whole? Like what would the timeline, like play that out for us?
It depends on what you're adopting. If it's adopted by ordinance, we would probably take that through on its own and then just include that in the handbook. That's what I've got in here for applicable code provisions or already adopted ordinances. It's just really putting them in one convenient place for you guys to have.
And then the handbook, is this something that we're just compiling? Or is this something that we need to put as like a resolution or whatever? Like how are we codifying this document?
I think you could adopt it by resolution each year. It would need updating each year based on whatever new things get added to the code or changed throughout the year, but it would be something that could be updated. Be much easier to do that once we have the first handbook.
Okay, so if we adopt it and then if we adopt a handbook and then we update anything within it, then we would re-adopt it at a later date with the new.
Yeah, I think that the following year, we just include whatever those code changes were in the new handbook, and then that would be adopted by resolution.
How does it work if we have a current handbook that we're working from, we update something mid-year, and then we don't adopt a new handbook? Like, what rules are we going under? The new
Whatever-
ones that we just adopted, or the ones that are currently in the handbook?
Whatever policies most recently adopted is what would rule over a prior version.
Okay, so it would take precedent over what is in the current handbook?
Yes.
Just trying to
Yeah.
understand like how that would function. Thank you.
Councilmember Lynn.
Are we in violation of the Open Meetings Act by having communication devices up there and using them during the meeting?
If you're communicating with each other, you could be.
What about with the audience? It wasn't any communication that, since you're the one representative up there, any communication? I know we're all guilty of it, I just don't, that's what I've been reading up on, I don't want.
Yeah. So the Open Meeting Act applies to communications among the public body. So I think that's where you have a technical violation potentially if members of the council are talking back and forth over text while something's being discussed at a meeting, then that's a potential violation.
What about if somebody from the public is communicating to the council about the topic?
Yeah. So the Open Meeting Act applies to public bodies, which is by definition is a majority of you all being together and discussing city business. So it may not be a technical violation, but you can see where it might be a perceived issue. If the meeting is about that topic, those discussions are really intended to be occurring in public.
Then, I mean, should we not look at then not having communication devices on the dais?
that is something you all could add in the handbook if that's what you want to do.
Other thoughts or questions or things that you want to add? Oh, I'm sorry.
I have a child that's else with Grammy during meetings, so I will always have my cell phone. So no matter what we do, I'll always violate that. But Catherine, it's been a while since I've read up on Norman's Magna Carta. And so I know in there, though, it does talk about specific council ethics, behavior, stuff like that, stuff that's sort of in here. So if we make a handbook and we were to adopt any resolution that's in conflict with the charter, like, how would we resolve that?
Yeah, I would not
Right, charter would
advise,
win, but,
yeah, the charter wins. I would not advise adopting something that's in conflict with the charter.
so how, would that have to be a public change then?
If you're amending what's in the charter, yes, but our council ethics ordinance, for example, is not adopted by charter. There are provisions in the charter that talk about conflicts in terms of ownership interests of something coming before council. The ordinance goes further than that, and that would just be changed by a majority vote of the council and not by a public vote.
Okay.
And council member, just for the record, I'd agree with you. We have to have communicate, something can happen on the outside, so we have to bring that into the conversation. How do you do that? I think if I can interpret for you, what you were trying to say was outside communication, adult communications that are going on between persons that nobody else can hear. And I think am I representing?
That's
that
it. I
correctly?
mean, it's been prosecuted in other places.
I
And
understand.
it's for that very reason, because if you're supposed to be in a public meeting having discussion, it's supposed to be public discussion, not between me and Rashar or me and Lauren or me and Matt.
Sure.
All that is supposed to be out in the open.
I mean,
And-
your concern if we're texting each other is one thing, but if someone's like, "Oh, when's the soccer game on Saturday?" Like,
But,
I mean, I
that's
think
different,
there's
but if it's at the
different-
subject at hand, my thing is like you can see and look at your phone and see if it's your kid calling. That's one thing, and if your kid's calling you during council meeting, it might be an emergency or somebody
Yeah,
else.
I think the difference is the city business. It's the conduct of city business and how that's occurring.
so a lot of the times, then let me ask you this, Catherine. People will be watching and they'll send us emails, and I know that we respond to emails as they come in, but it's still like all of. I mean, we can't talk to anybody during the meeting.
The act isn't clear on whether that's a technical violation. I would just say, when you look at the public purpose behind the Open Meeting Act, it's to facilitate an informed citizenry of what's going on in the government. And so if we're talking about a topic at a meeting, and at the same time we're texting people about that topic, it's not facilitating an informed citizenry. And so we just need to be careful about that.
If we have citizens that message us because they can't get up here, maybe it's they have a disability and they're unable to get up here, or they're unable to speak, are we not allowed to get a message? And then I may not be communicating back, but it's at least a thought from somebody that's in my ward or that I'm a representative of, that they would like their voice heard as well. So are you saying that our constituents aren't allowed to message us while
I'm
we're?
not saying that.
Okay, I just want to make sure
No,
that
it's-
that's clear.
The Open
because
Meeting Act applies
I
to
give
communication
all
on
of
the
my
public body.
constituents open access. If you want to message me because you can't get up here to a council meeting and it's something that you're concerned about, please let me know. Because if there's a topic as we're discussing it, I want to know that. I want to hear from people and hear their concerns and their questions and be able to ask those questions right there on the dais.
Yeah.
Councilmember Holman?
Yeah, I would agree it's not a good idea for us to probably be texting each other during a meeting. But I think we all get messages, texts, emails from residents that are watching at home, for sure. And not usually able to respond to them right away in that meeting, but, I'll mark it down as, in the column of for, against, whatever it may be, or they made a point that I hadn't thought of. On the ethics part and consequences, I mentioned before the council has discussed this a few years ago and kind of came to a stalemate about what consequences would be, how we would enforce those against each other, how future councils would potentially use that against each other for political retaliation or you know, you get a majority that doesn't like this guy that's in the minority, and so, you know, 5 votes. And so we kind of came down to, you know, not a good idea for council members to probably endorse candidates for mayor or city council. And that was a point of contention before, is that it was prohibited. There wasn't a real consequence for it, but there was a former mayor whose name appeared on a campaign flyer for a governor of the Cherokee Nation at some event in Tulsa, and that was used to go after that mayor, saying that she was endorsing a candidate and that she should be, you know, taken up on ethics. And if I recall, it was even pursued into the legal realm of like trying to have her removed from office over that type of thing. So it didn't really make sense to us why would a mayor's name appearing on an election that has nothing to do with Norman, that isn't even around here. But it was kind of a political thing that her and this guy had a personal beef between each other over a land dispute and some other stuff. And then we kind of, all felt that not a good idea for us to endorse candidates running for the same office we currently hold. You know, if the person you endorse loses and then you have to serve with those people, then what's it going to be like? Are you going to be able to get stuff done? Are people want to work with you? So it probably wasn't a good idea, but we couldn't figure out a good way to for us to punish each other for that and it not be used. The term I recall is a sword instead of a shield. And that it was likely that it would be used as a sword more often potentially than a shield. And that because our terms are only 2 years, the kind of consensus was the voters in our wards hold us accountable, and if they don't like our behavior, then, you know, they can kick us out. So to what extent do any of us think it's our jobs to police each other? And what extent do you believe the voters of our wards will hold us accountable? You know, how egregious can we be? Who knows? But that was the kind of difficulty we found, is we couldn't figure out a good way to enforce ethics rules and have a real penalty that we try to enforce against each other and it not be used unfairly or politically motivated in the future. So maybe we have different ideas than the council did a few years ago about that, but that's kind of why we didn't do anything then about it.
Yes, and I just had this may be a horrible idea, but in that, is there a mechanism, and maybe, Catherine, maybe there are examples out there, but has there ever been such a system whereby if a person on the city council does a thing and there are allegations raised that you violated this line of our handbook and our code of ethics, that a third party, whoever that third party would be, would review and make some ruling? So it's not a matter of like 5 saying, or 6 or 7 or 8 saying, you know, the one person did a thing, but the situation could be, you know, like briefed, and it goes to a third party, whoever that is, for evaluation and a ruling whether or not they violated the handbook. Just a thought. How do you?
And isn't that how the state senate or state house does it? They have the right of censure for each other, which I'm not sure has any real teeth. You just get in trouble.
Right, they govern each other,
Yeah.
basically. They don't have a third party necessarily, but I think they and other cities do this too, where it's the governing body that does that.
And note, there's no consequences, just tisk, tisk, tisk.
Right, right, and maybe that has political consequences, but no.
Yeah.
Nothing more
Yeah,
significant
I would just
than that.
mention in closing, my last comment is that I think a lot of former council members, they've expressed, that I've known over the years, that they had a viewpoint that they didn't want, they felt like they were doing a good job if the public didn't know their political preference. Like they felt like they were doing their city council job right if the public wasn't thinking of them as being politically one way or the other. Like they didn't endorse, they didn't have social media back then, so they didn't post about stuff. So people may just not have, you know, people just didn't display it as much as we all do now. And so that was just kind of a thing that they had. So I don't think they ever had to enforce it because a lot of them just didn't do it. And that's the only real like ethics one I can recall in my time has been like a candidate, someone endorsing somebody, and that being brought up as far as our ethics policy.
And that got amended like 2 or 3 years ago,
Yeah,
maybe?
yeah.
Where that provision is no longer in the ethics ordinance that prohibits endorsement.
And we got rid of it because there wasn't a penalty. And we're like, why are we going to have a
Right.
thing if there's no recourse or nothing? So
Who sued? Was it a private citizen or was
yeah,
it? So is that a way that instead of like us governing each other, that private citizens, if we're in violation of something in the ethics, that a private citizen could say, they're in violation, we want to sue the
Yeah,
city?
I mean, without any teeth, I don't think it makes a difference. And in that prior case, I can't recall I don't think they sued the city, but I think they made an issue of it, and then I think the mayor at the time withdrew her name from the flyer, or,
yeah.
issued a statement of saying, I didn't intend for them to use my position. And I think that was the actual situation where they used that title and she had not authorized it.
Intended to be there as Cindy Rosenthal,
right.
not Mayor Pro Tem.
Right. It was a real interesting situation.
That's my retort.
I thought the idea of the handbook was just to give guidelines for new council members on, the what's, why, how we do business and who to contact. When we came on the job here, it's like, who do we talk to? Jane? We talked to Chris on certain issues here. So that was my idea of the handbook. I think, we can't legislate morality.
Right.
And I think we're headed in that direction, that we have a book that's not a handbook, but more of a charter issue. And we already have that in the charter on how we behave. It's that decorum and civility part that dictates our behavior on council and sometimes off council. So I think we need to look at what the true intent of this handbook should be. And if we need to enforce certain behaviors, I can agree with Stephen that it's our voters that decide and determine if our actions outside council deserve to be recalled or deserve to be rebuked or to be punished. And what I've seen so far is that, we have attacked each other here on council. I mean, I've seen it, we've all seen it, and the mayor has done it before, not you, and she rebuked people on certain issues like not supporting the homeless initiative, and that shouldn't even happen on council, because if we can't have open and honest discussion, it was an old, Mayor Clark had made a comment, but it's not the first time and it's not gonna end. But my point is that I think it starts here, and we don't need a handbook to tell us how we need to act and behave, okay? I think we need a handbook that shows us, like you pointed out, Lauren, on the processes and how often we update this book. More of a guideline to how we run our business as council people. Because there's a lot of information that comes in when you get elected, and we just don't know, and it's just not there. I mean, this book that I'm seeing in my head is how do we get started? Who do we call? What the process is? How do we make a motion? How do we put things on the agenda? These things we just don't get taught. Brenda, how many times have you and I called, like, how do we do this? And so that's what the handbook should be about, and not about anything punitive. I think we have a charter already in place for that, and if we need to enforce the ethics on personal behavior, then that's something that we need to look at down the road, or take a serious look into it, because we're not all perfect, and we do stupid things, and should that be something that if it's not a misdemeanor or a felony, but should we kick that office for that? Look, we've seen worse, but I'm not arguing on that. I'm just saying is that I think the charter clearly defines how we need to behave and how we behave, and what the consequences could be. And so that's what I'm saying. So make the handbook a handbook, okay? Make it a guide for us on how to become the best council people, processes, procedures, contact information, best practices, and leave the punitive stuff, if we're really gonna look at that, to the charter. Because do you wanna look at something through the eyes of the examples that he brought up? That you don't like somebody because they ran against somebody, or you supported somebody, or you said something? It's ridiculous. So that's, right now, that's just my 2 cents worth, and I just think we need to be careful heading this way here. I like the idea of a handbook. It would have helped me out tremendously. But let's keep it on the handbook and how to do our jobs, and not anything punitive.
Understood. Councilmember Foreman.
So when I ran, one thing Ward 6 kept saying to me was, please don't be like the rest of council. And it predates the people on this council. It carries through this council. But we've always had council members that have been very inappropriate with the public. And the public don't like that. And I've not been that way. And so that's why I got reelected and why I'm pretty well liked in my ward. I don't think that we need to spell out what you can and can't do as far as ethics and code of conduct because it's very subjective and really it's just a tar and feather and publicly shame the council member. It would be used that way. It's very subjective. And so, I mean, really, we, other than like murder, I mean, we really can't be kicked off council. You know, it's only our constituents that can do that. And so I would just hope that people with high emotional intelligence and self-restraint would run for council and we don't have to keep having these conversations. But the subjectivity of the matter would be a reason why I wouldn't want to put that in a handbook, as much as I would like to tell people to shut up. Some people support what they see, some of us don't. And again, it's subjective. And so I don't want that to ever be weaponized against each other, so I would be, I know.
I don't
Yeah,
care.
I know,
I'm just
but-
asking honestly,
Yeah.
and I've gone in and asked her this in her
Yeah.
office, like, if there is no consequences, then what are we doing?
But even if there are consequences, like, is it worth it? Because then,
No, yeah, and that's what I'm,
Yeah.
that's what I'm saying, like,
you know,
what are those consequences? If it's that there isn't anything, fine.
Well, it should be in the charter. That's where it should be spell out the consequences, I believe, not in the handbook.
Well, that's line 2 in this handbook is charter, so that's why we're talking about it.
And in my vision, and thinking about a book that sits down there and guides us, most professional organizations have a handbook that they hand the employee when he comes or she comes. And you read that book and usually you read about halfway through it, then you forget to read the other half because it's such interesting stuff. But sometimes it's fun to go back and go, what was I, who, all the rest of those kids. I think it'll help us, and particularly coming from a military background, everything's got an SOP. This is how you do, it's like the police department. Everything has a way of doing things. I think that's a little too strict. There are things, I agree, that punitive things unless it's some kind of law, and then you've got another whole system working. Anything we can do to help ourselves become more professional, more whatever to the citizens that voted us in. When we say, you know, can we fix this back fence? Can you come in here and get this done? We can say, no, we cannot because the charter says, because we have it here. And if you'd like to see that, we can do that. And just work things so that we have the same kind of idea. When we're talking about what happens in a meeting. We haven't had any problem with that. I think we pretty much agree most of the time. This is what's supposed to happen and how it's supposed to happen. But we have had some long things. I think there are some things to really talk about. Public input, to really discuss what we want, because it really has to go serve the citizens in their voice to us when they're coming in and they're saying we want this to happen or don't want this to happen. How do we best serve those citizens? And we'll have a book that gives us a little guidance on that. There's some things, I mean, I don't think I've ever seen that resolution that was put out in, when did Mary do that? 05. I'd never seen it. I just hadn't hooked it up. And to have them in a compendium that sits down there and these are all the things, I just think it'd be a great reference and a great tool. So, yes, sir.
I'd like clarification on the use of the cell phone things here. I mean, so we got 2 cell phones. The 3 of us know in government service that, you know, anything that's created on our term in office or in the office is part of the government documents. It belongs to the military, the government here. So can you clarify that? I mean, so we do have 2 phones here. And Kelly, I don't know what you're alluding to. Are you talking about our personal phones and communications with people or just our government phones?
Any while you're sitting up there is what I'm worried about. Just some of the things I've read on it, I've had people send me different things, and there were people getting prosecuted for open meetings act. One of them was even getting a year in jail, and it was for having communications while sitting on the dais. So I forget where it was at, and I was just reading it, and that prompt me to ask the question about it.
I think-
I don't want that. I don't want us to avoid any
I think
of
that's an
that.
important conversation we need to look into because, was this a personal phone call? I mean, so if it's personal versus what we have here, the issued phones here, I mean, we should know so we don't walk into that territory.
And we didn't have city-issued phones until last July, I think it was. So it doesn't matter who owns the phone, it matters what business is being conducted
Yeah.
under the Open Meeting Act and open records. And if it's the public's business, regardless of the device, it is an open record, it is part of the Open Meeting Act. And the reason we did the city cell phones is it makes it a lot easier for you guys to maintain all of your business on something that can just be handed to us when we get a request. It was really more for ease of use rather than saying, well, now you can do your side business on your personal phone and it won't ever be subject to the Open Meeting Act. That's just not true. It just depends on whether you're doing the public's business or not.
Okay. And so Kelly, you're saying that even on their personal phones, they were subpoenaed and they were prosecuted?
I don't remember the details about it. I just remember glancing over, and there was something else that even linked to another one. There were several of them that I read, and one of them there was a prosecution, and it was up. Now I don't know if the guy actually went to jail, but it might have been a suspended sentence or something. But it was a sentence of a year and it involved making communications from the dais that were not. I mean, I was like, that seems extreme, but it made sense to me because if it's supposed to be public record,
I think it's the same thing as they having a conversation with us on the dais from the public. All right.
I think it should be, I think we'd be better served not having any communications up there, to be honest with you. I think meetings would go a lot faster when we get done with business.
I kind of agree with you in intent, but we've got little kids. I've got my 13-year-old.
That's different if you're gonna take an emergency or something like that, but if you're communicating with the public that's sitting at that meeting, which I know happens often, the public's sitting out there and they're communicating with us up on the dais, things that they can communicate in public as well. They can sign up and talk about it, but
I'm in agreement. I think we should look into this, and I mean that's not a big deal. I don't think we have anything that we're not planning or scheming anything on the dais here, but it would be one of those gee whiz things to have.
I mean, all the people text me like the microphones aren't on, we can't hear them. Like, I'm not supposed to do anything about that. Like, I mean, sometimes the public's got something to say. And
there's nobody here though.
you have to respond. But if they're at home watching, I mean, being versus in person, like they're gonna hear us, but
There's nobody here that has not had somebody send them or respond to something and I'm just saying that I don't wanna get in trouble for that and I don't want that to screw us all up in lawsuits and who knows? I'm just saying if it's one of those important things, we should definitely take a look at it and see what we should be doing. We've all done it. Nobody's not done it. Should we be doing it? And just reading what I read on that, it looks like we probably shouldn't.
Well, when that comes up, we can sure chew on it,
You know,
find out how that works out. Anything from you, Mr. Manager?
No, of course, the ability today to kind of get some scope, yeah, this can be a very, long, all-inclusive document. It can be kind of the 30,000-foot view, and it can be, and you're kind of the first, so you get to put your fingerprints all over it. And future councils will get to add to it and, delete from it as they see fit also. So, not a right or a wrong, and of course, staff's goal is to bring you what you're looking for in a couple of different stages as it develops and flesh gets added to the bones, before council considers it as a final document to vote on. So, we'll keep tweaking on it and working on it until council says we think we're ready and it's ripe, and bring it to us for action.
And legal wanted to work on it quarterly?
Yeah, I think that's what we talked about at the retreat is just, we'll continue to put stuff together and then bring it back to you quarterly so that at the end of the year we have something that is hopefully useful, user-friendly, and has the information you all want in it, so.
Thank you. Councilmember Schuler?
I was actually next.
Oh, sorry.
I was just gonna say that, like I said before, I really would like to see where it's like appointments, where there's possible bias that can be included in that. Whether that's an appointment from the mayor, city manager, city clerk, whomever. I think anything where it's that type of situation should definitely have like rules, so it's not just a selection. Like there needs to be some type of rhyme or reason, whether that comes before council, whether that's, I don't know what that is, whether it's seniority, whether that's, let's bring everyone in as a council body and discuss who wants to be on what committee, because I may not know anything about BACA and I got placed on that. I mean, I'm just throwing that out there. So I think it would be important to have conversations and actual understanding of why things are happening. And I agree with what Mayor was saying about processes in place.
SOP.
Yes, okay.
So I think just some final, I guess, comments. So I think for the handbook as a whole, like I do think coming in, like we do get orientation and we talk to staff members and all of that kind of stuff, but I don't think that you're really prepared to utilize all of these documents in that way. And having it kind of spelled out in a more robust fashion would be really helpful for any new council member to come on. But additionally, I think something that is helpful for the public, because this will be a public document as well, and it'll provide guidelines and expectations for the public around what we know, what information we have, where some of these really important things are, and understanding, like I said, like all of the role and what it fully encompasses. So it might provide an opportunity for people who are running to have a better understanding, if they so choose, to read and, you know, understand and come to meetings and do those things prior to getting elected or to serving. I think the thing that I'm struggling with, and I understand, you know, what Councilmember Holman was saying of a previous council, trying to figure out what is that line between how, is it a sword, is it a shield? And I do think that is really challenging, because obviously we are adults, we run for office, we should be able to, you know, comport ourselves appropriately in this fashion, and we do understand, I think, what the expectations are of us when we step into this role, and it is clearly outlined in our charter. The thing that I think I'm struggling with most is that if it's outlined and we don't have some kind of repercussion, and I do understand, you know, we are elected to 2-year terms, the public holds us accountable. So I'm still struggling with exactly what that mechanism looks like. I don't want to be in the business of policing other council members. That's not my job. It shouldn't be my job. But outside of a mechanism to like remove for office, I do think that having some kind of provision for censure, which is not a removal, it's not a you know, final action, but it is a way for us to say, hey, there's a code of ethics. We don't approve of this behavior, because I think what our public is saying and what I'm hearing from our residents is that what is the recourse? You know, we have something that is outlined in our charter, and if there is no consequence, no repercussion, what's the point? And they're asking us for something more. Now, maybe it's a larger conversation to educate the public on our roles and responsibilities, which this handbook, like I said, could help be. But I don't know that the conversation around ethics is fully cut and dry and closed at this point.
Doesn't have to be.
Yeah, so I think that we might still struggle on that and have some more conversations about what does that look like and how does our public want us to handle those things. I would really like to see what our residents feel they would like to see from our council in terms of how we hold each other accountable or not, or if they want to just hold their own personal council member accountable. Like, what are some of those mechanisms? And I, you know, like the city manager said, you know, having a third party evaluate, what does that look like? I'd like to entertain another option that is potentially outside of council. Like we have our
It eliminates the bias.
what? Sorry.
It eliminates the bias.
Yeah. So, I'm just trying to figure out like what is the provision for that. Because ultimately, yes, we should be adults and we should know how to act accordingly. But the reason that it's being discussed is because there have been individuals who have not acted in accordance with the code of ethics. And so I think we need to continue to address it because the public is asking for that.
Mr. Mayor, maybe the ability for staff to move forward, couple of steps we could take. Homework assignment 1, reach out and just kind of find out what that language may look like among some of our neighboring agencies and some bigger cities and some smaller cities that may have addressed that, and bring you some examples of what that may look like. And even kind of flesh out the concept of if there was a third-party arbitrator who, so there is no bias and it's not a, ganging up on somebody maybe from a different political party or somebody who just disagreed with a direction the majority wanted to go, we can do some homework and kind of bring you back what that might look like also. And you can say, add a little of that and take some of that away, because it's not done and it'll always be on paper, so you can keep working and we'll keep working for you until we find happiness.
And it's a hard system because am I interrupting? I didn't mean to.
Oh, I just wanted to say that like I want to be clear that like I'm not wholly advocating that like that's the route that we need
Sure,
to take.
what we need to talk
I just want to have a conversation that is fully thought out, fully fleshed out, that we discuss all of the options before we decide, no, it's okay the way that it is. That's so, we may take no action and make no changes, or we may find something that is appropriate.
And I think that'd be wonderful. A lot of this is discussions on the idea for either punitive justice or restorative justice, and how do we do that? And that's been going on since the Greeks, so it is hard because, we're trying to work together, and I guarantee you get enough people in a room, somebody's gonna be disagreeable or disagree, so. And, yes, sir.
I definitely agree that there has definitely been some ethics issues on the council,
Okay,
for sure. But I would say you might want to be careful about weaponizing that, because you might not be happy what you wished for. In other words, what is the process now that we have in place for council appointments? Is it that the mayor gets elected and then they serve at the will of the mayor?
For
For-
citizen committees?
For
for
citizen
council?
committees, I know are voted on, but for the council committee.
Yeah, typically it's been, the mayor, once elected in July of each year, makes those appointments. Any council committee, anybody can go to, but
Is that in the charter that the mayor does council
no,
committees?
no, it's just been practice.
Okay.
okay. Well, those are wonderful ideas, good things to work on. Seeing no more questions, we are adjourned.